Tonight, the narrow passage that powers the global economy is closed. This is how it happened. It is 3:47 in the morning. The bridge of the supertanker is dark, except for the glow of instruments. One officer, one cup of cold coffee, one radar screen painting the sea in pale green. Outside, the water is black and perfectly calm. The air is dense with heat and salt. The vessel beneath him is 1/4 of a kilometer long. It carries 2 million barrels of crude oil, enough to fuel all of Germany for 4 days. And it is moving at 11 knots through a passage so narrow that the shorelights of 2 different countries are visible simultaneously, port and starboard, close enough to seem within reach. Nearly 1/5 of all the oil consumed on Earth passes through this water. Or rather, it did. In late February 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes on Iran under Operation Epic Fury, presented by Washington and Tel Aviv as a final attempt to destroy Iran's nuclear infrastructure before it reached operational capability. Within hours, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps transmitted warnings to every vessel in the strait. No ship would be permitted to pass. Tanker traffic fell by 70% in the first 24 hours, then 90%, then, for all practical purposes, to 0. More than 150 ships dropped anchor outside the passage and waited. Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, CMA, CGM, the companies that move the world's goods, suspended all operations through the strait until further notice. Brent crude surged past $100 per barrel for the first time in 4 years, its sharpest spike in a generation. The IRGC's spokesman said, "We will not allow 1 liter of oil to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Get ready for oil at $200 a barrel." This is not a drill. This is not a scenario. This is not a documentary about a risk that might one day materialize. This is what it looks like when the strait actually closes. The question, the one that energy ministries and naval war colleges and commodity trading desks have spent decades refusing to answer out loud, is no longer hypothetical. It is the news. There is a strip of water between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the coast of Oman. At its narrowest, it is 33 kilometers wide. You could drive across it in 20 minutes. Every day, in normal times, approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil and refined petroleum products pass through it, more than the entire daily consumption of the United States and Europe combined. Those are normal times. These are not. To understand why the closure of this strait is sending shockwaves through every economy on Earth, you have to understand the geography that made it inevitable. The Persian Gulf is a semi-enclosed sea, stretching roughly 1,000 kilometers from the Shatt al-Arab Delta in the northwest to its single exit point in the southeast. 8 nations share its coastline: Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman. 8 nations, 1 strait, but only one of them has the power to shut the entire system down. For 4 of those nations, Kuwait, Iraq, Bahrain, and Qatar, the strait is not simply the most important maritime passage. It is the only one. These countries have no other door to the open ocean. When the strait closes, they are sealed in. And beneath those countries, and the 4 that surround them, lies the reason the strait matters to everyone else. The Persian Gulf Basin holds approximately 48% of the world's proven crude oil reserves, 40% of proven natural gas, more hydrocarbons in this one semi-enclosed sea and its surrounding land than anywhere else on the surface of the planet. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar, the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas, whose two main production facilities at Ras Laffan and Massaid were struck in late February, halting LNG output entirely. All of it behind one door. And that door is, right now, effectively closed. But that is not the most dangerous fact about this region. The dangerous fact is that almost all of it must pass through a single exit. An exit 33 kilometers wide at its tightest, narrower than the distance from one end to London to the other. Through this gap, the International Maritime Organization has established a traffic separation scheme, mandatory shipping lanes dividing the passage. 2 inbound, 2 outbound, each barely 3 kilometers wide, passing simultaneously through the territorial waters of Iran, Oman, and the UAE. No single nation controls the route in its entirety. No single nation can guarantee safe passage alone. Now consider what it feels like to transit it today. You are the captain of a very large crude carrier. Your vessel is 330 meters long. It draws 22 meters of water. It does not stop quickly. It does not turn sharply. Iranian IRGC speedboats have attacked multiple vessels in these waters in the past 2 weeks. Drone boats have struck tankers in the engine room. Shore-based missiles are active on the northern coast. Your insurance underwriter has just canceled your coverage. The radio is broadcasting a warning in Farsi and English. Any vessel linked to the United States, Israel, or their allies will be considered a legitimate target. You anchor. You wait, along with 150 other ships, doing exactly the same thing.
Attention all ships, this is Sepah Navy. All navigating through the Strait of Hormuz is forbidden.
The United States maintains the 5th Fleet in Bahrain. France and the United Kingdom have naval assets in the region. Combined maritime forces has been conducting escort operations for select vessels. But the mathematics are unforgiving. There are not enough warships to protect every commercial vessel. And without protection, without insurance, without certainty, ships do not move. The world has known this for decades. It has never solved it. And here's why. The geography of this strait has turned a single strip of water into the world's most dangerous bottleneck. But this is only one of the fault lines currently shifting beneath our feet. If you want to stay ahead of these global shifts, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. By hitting the notification bell, you ensure you're the first to know when we release our next investigation. I'm already working on a follow-up. This is Act 2. For 6 days in 2021, a single ship blocked the Suez Canal. In less than a week, nearly $10 billion of global trade was delayed. Insurance markets convulsed. Supply chains across Europe began to strain. Supermarket shelves showed gaps within 72 hours. The ship had blocked a canal carrying 9% of global seaborne trade. The ship was called the Ever Given. It was an accident. It lasted 6 days. The Strait of Hormuz carries more than twice that volume in oil alone. It is not blocked by an accident, and it has now been effectively closed for over 2 weeks. We know what 6 days looks like. We are about to find out what 6 weeks looks like. Every day, 1 barrel of oil out of every 5 consumed on Earth normally passes through this water. Right now, almost none of it does. 21% of the world's petroleum liquids, 25% of all globally traded liquefied natural gas, all of it frozen. The cascade has already begun, not as a forecast, but as a fact unfolding in real time. Brent crude surged more than 70% in less than 3 weeks, its largest sustained spike in a generation, crossing $100 per barrel for the first time in 4 years. The IEA has taken the unprecedented step of releasing 400 million barrels from emergency reserves worldwide. Major investment banks have revised their recession forecasts upward across the board. Economists warn that if prices remain elevated for 2 months, the Eurozone, the United Kingdom, and Japan would all enter economic contraction. Japan's Prime Minister has authorized the release of strategic petroleum reserves. South Korea has done the same. India is rationing aviation fuel at domestic airports. In Ulsan, on the southeast coast of South Korea, a factory manager named Park oversees an assembly plant that normally builds 600 vehicles per day. His plant operates on just-in-time inventory. There is no warehouse behind him. Components arrive hours before they are needed. This week, the line stopped. Not because the plant ran out of oil, because the shipping insurance on the component's vessel was canceled. The ship is anchored outside Hormuz, with 150 others. The components are aboard. They are not moving. Park is on his third call with his logistics director. Nobody has a timeline. Oil is not merely fuel. That was always the first misconception to discard. Now it is the first lesson being taught in real time. When crude oil stops reaching refineries, the cascade is not linear. It compounds. Jet fuel within days. Petrochemical feedstocks within weeks. Fertilizer supply within months. Each one has a multiplier effect on everything below it in the production chain. Fertilizer prices have already moved sharply upward in 2 weeks. The spring planting window in the American Midwest is approaching. If shipments remain blocked, food inflation follows the oil price upward on a lag of 8 to 12 weeks. If Hormuz stays closed, the impact does not remain in energy markets. It enters the grocery store. It enters the pharmacy. It enters the factory floor and the airline timetable, and the shipping container that carries the clothes on your back. A sustained closure of the Strait of Hormuz does not produce a fuel crisis. It produces a civilization crisis. And it has begun. There is a man in Rotterdam who works the night shift at a petroleum distribution terminal. His name is Peter. He has worked there for 19 years. On the night the Ever Given grounded in the Suez Canal, his supervisor called him at 2 a.m. to run supply projections. They worked through until dawn. The disruption was 6 days. The canal was 6,000 kilometers away. He has been working nights since the crisis began. He keeps a printed copy of the IEA emergency procedure manuals in his locker. He has now read it 4 times. The dependency was never a secret. Every government that relies on Gulf oil has known precisely how exposed it is. The mathematics have been published, modeled, wargamed, and presented to Senate hearings and cabinet briefings for 40 years. The knowledge did not produce a solution. Because there is no solution that does not require either dismantling the modern economy or confronting the country that sits on the northern shore of the strait. That confrontation has now begun. Iran has spent 40 years preparing for one scenario: closing this strait. Everything else, the diplomacy, the nuclear negotiations, the proxy networks across the Middle East, everything else was context. The strait was always the card. In late February 2026, the card was played. In Farsi, the strategic value of Hormuz is sometimes described as a tang, a bottleneck, a throat. The metaphor is anatomical. And for 4 decades, Iran's position was that of a hand resting lightly on the throat. Not squeezing, simply resting, making sure you knew it was there. That restraint reflected a calculation. A full blockade would also stop Iranian oil exports, costing Tehran its primary source of state revenue. The threat was the weapon. The actual closure would be too expensive to sustain. Operation Epic Fury changed that calculation. When the strikes killed Iran's supreme leader and destroyed its nuclear infrastructure, Iran's deterrent calculus inverted. The economic cost of closure, previously prohibitive, became secondary to the imperative of response. The hand stopped resting. It closed. The instrument of that closure is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGCN. Iran does not need a navy powerful enough to defeat the United States. It only needs one powerful enough to make the Strait too dangerous to use. More than 100 fast attack craft, shore-based anti-ship vessels with ranges exceeding 150 kilometers, midget submarines designed for shallow water, swarm tactics, built to overwhelm, not to match, and mines. Always mines. The mine is the weapon that kept naval planners awake before this began. It keeps them awake now for different reasons. The United States has confirmed destroying 28 mine-laying vessels in the opening weeks of the conflict. But the Persian Gulf is vast, the water shallow in many places, and Iranian midget submarines operate with a degree of concealment that makes systemic mine clearance extraordinarily difficult. The UK's Defence Secretary has offered Britain's autonomous mine hunting systems. The operation, if it proceeds, will take weeks. The confrontation at Hormuz is not a possibility. It is a 50-year history reaching its most acute point. Between 1980 and 1988, the tanker war saw more than 400 commercial vessels attacked. 63 nations had ships damaged or destroyed. The world kept buying oil because both superpowers intervened, reluctantly and expensively, to keep the lanes open. Through the 2019 Stena Imperial seizure, through the Abqaiq drone strikes that sent oil prices up 14% in a single day, through the Houthi Red Sea campaign of 2024 that previewed exactly what denial of access tactics look like in practice. Each episode was a rehearsal. What is happening now is the performance. The United States Fifth Fleet is conducting what its commanders are calling enhanced escort operations, escorting 3 to 4 commercial ships per day through the Strait under air cover from destroyers. The capacity is limited. The US can protect a fraction of the traffic that normally transits. The insurance market knows this and has responded accordingly. War risk premiums have risen by as much as 1,000%. Without insurance, most commercial ships cannot sail regardless of naval protection. The deterrence is real. It is also, self-evidently, incomplete. And then there is China. China is Iran's largest oil customer. It has continued receiving Iranian crude throughout the conflict with Iranian tankers, operating under what analysts call the shadow fleet, moving oil to Chinese buyers outside the main shipping lanes, largely unimpeded. China imports roughly 45% of its Gulf oil through the Strait under normal conditions. It has accumulated strategic reserves of approximately 1 billion barrels, providing a buffer of several months before domestic shortages begin to bite. Beijing's public position is that it supports freedom of navigation and regional stability. Its private position is more complex. Consider what this means. The country most vulnerable to an Iranian closure of the Strait is also Iran's most important economic partner. The country that would suffer most from a prolonged blockade is the country whose purchases make Iran's economy viable enough to sustain one. That sentence should not make sense. In the Gulf, it does. China has not resolved this contradiction. For now, it's making phone calls. Behind closed doors, analysts say Beijing may be the only party with sufficient leverage over Tehran to negotiate a partial opening. The price of that leverage has not yet been made public. The escalation ladder has been climbed, rung by rung, faster than most planners anticipated. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who succeeded his father within hours of the strike, has confirmed in his first public address that the Strait will remain closed and that attacks on Gulf shipping will continue. The card has been played. The question now is whether anyone can take it off the table. Everything you have just heard is the architecture of a crisis. What follows is the crisis itself. Naval war colleges have spent decades red-teaming the Strait of Hormuz. They modeled 3 distinct scenarios in ascending order of severity. What no red team exercise fully anticipated was that elements of all 3 would occur simultaneously within the first 2 weeks. This is what each scenario looks like when it stops being a planning document and becomes the morning news. It begins with a misread. The Skylight was a tanker with links to the Iranian Shadow Fleet, sanctioned by the US Treasury but still at sea. In the first days of the conflict, an IRGC patrol craft intercepted it north of Qatar, Oman, in disputed waters. What was intended as a warning became an engagement. 2 Indian crew members were killed, 3 were injured, the remaining 20 evacuated. The vessel was, by Iranian records, a legitimate target. By international maritime law, the attack occurred in waters where safe passage is guaranteed. The ambiguity was the point. It always is. By the time markets opened in Tokyo 3 hours after the strike, Brent crude was up 8%. By London Open, it had added another 4. Insurance underwriters suspended coverage for Gulf of Oman transits. Not for specific vessels, for all vessels. The strait was not closed by an order. It began closing because the withdrawal of willingness preceded any formal announcement. A factory in Osaka making automotive components shut its inbound logistics. Not because it ran out of fuel, because its shipping insurance was canceled and raw materials could not be delivered. The accidental spark. Except that, in retrospect, nothing about it was accidental. This one was deliberate, and it was surgical. Within days of the strikes, the IRGC formally announced that the strait was closed to vessels from the United States, Israel, and their Western allies. The announcement was precise, legalistic, delivered with complete calm. No single barrel had yet been physically stopped by official decree, but the declaration was sufficient. Within 10 days, Brent crude crossed $100 per barrel for the first time in 4 years, and kept climbing. The world negotiated in real time. Washington convened emergency calls with Riyadh, Tokyo, Brussels, and Beijing. The UN Security Council met in emergency session. Russia expressed readiness to cooperate with the United States on stabilizing energy markets. The first such public signal in years. China did not respond for 11 hours. The IEA evoked its emergency reserve mechanism and released 400 million barrels of collective reserves. Analysts at Al Jazeera noted that 400 million barrels, divided by the world's daily consumption, covers approximately 4 days of global supply. It calmed the market briefly. It did not fix the problem. Tehran was not negotiating to back down. It was negotiating to extract a price for backing down. The restriction was the leverage, not the objective. Iran has done this before, and it knows the architecture of the pressure it is creating. Weeks into the crisis, no agreement has been reached. The third scenario was always the most severe. Analysts assumed it would require a deliberate decision by Tehran's highest leadership to trigger it. What the past 2 weeks have demonstrated is that it can be assembled incrementally, mine by mine, drone by drone, attack by attack, without ever requiring a single order that crosses a clear threshold. Mines have been laid in the northern shipping lanes. The United States has confirmed destroying 28 mine-capable vessels, but the total number deployed is unknown. Drone boats have struck at least 3 commercial vessels. Shore-based missile batteries remain at readiness along the Iranian coast. The ports of Duqm and Solala in Oman, the alternative bypass routes that would have theoretically allowed some oil to move around the strait, have been struck by Iranian drones, their insurance risk ratings raised to effectively prohibitive levels. The pipelines that engineers pointed to as partial alternatives are operating. Saudi Arabia is diverting oil to the Red Sea port of Yanbu via the east-west pipeline. at least 5 million barrels per day, less than a quarter of normal Hormuz flow. The UAE's Habjan Fujairah pipeline is moving 1.5 million barrels per day for Abu Dhabi's exports. Together, they cover perhaps 30% of the shortfall in the best-case scenario, assuming the Red Sea remains clear of Houthi activity, which it currently does not. The gap between what can move and what the world needs is approximately 12 million barrels per day. The United States Strategic Petroleum Reserve held 415 million barrels on February 18th, roughly 17 days of U.S. net import cover at maximum drawdown rates. The IEA's collective reserves represent approximately 90 days of net import cover across member states. Both are being drawn down simultaneously for the first time in history, at maximum authorized rates. Japan has begun mandatory energy rationing. South Korea has placed restrictions on industrial energy use. India is experiencing rolling power interruptions in states whose generating capacity depends on oil and gas imports. And China has approximately 1 billion barrels in strategic reserve, enough to sustain its consumption for several months without Hormuz oil. It is using that buffer to wait, to watch, and to decide what price it will extract for the phone call to Tehran that may be the only route to reopening. The mutual assured economic destruction that strategic theorists assumed would always prevent a full closure, the logic that Iran itself would suffer from stopping its own oil exports, held for 40 years. What Operation Epic Fury demonstrated is that when a state believes its survival is at stake, the economic calculus becomes secondary. Iran lost its supreme leader, its nuclear program, and significant portions of its military infrastructure in 72 hours. In that context, the economic cost of closing the strait is no longer a deterrent. It is an acceptable price. The scenarios that planners modeled as hypothetical, as planning documents and classified annexes, are the front page of every newspaper on Earth. The question that every energy minister, every naval planner, every commodity trader has asked, is there another way, has now been answered empirically. No, not at scale, not in time. There are pipelines. There are alternative routes. Engineers have studied them. Governments have funded them. And every one of them runs into the same wall. Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline is running at capacity, 5 million barrels per day to the Red Sea port of Yanbu, less than a quarter of normal Hormuz flow. The UAE's Habjan Fujairah pipeline moves 1.5 million barrels per day around the strait for Emirati exports. Together, 6.5 million barrels per day. The world is short by 12 million every day for as long as that strait remains closed. Iraq has no alternative at all. Its southern port of Basra moves through the Gulf. A foreign tanker carrying Iraqi fuel oil was struck and set ablaze near Basra in the opening week of the conflict. Iraq is effectively landlocked by a sea war. There is no global bypass. The geography has not changed since the pipelines were built. It will not change because the politics became more urgent. The energy transition was supposed to reduce this vulnerability, but the timeline of the transition and the timeline of this crisis do not align. The countries most exposed to the closure of Hormuz are not the wealthy nations already pivoting toward renewables. They are India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Bangladesh, the Philippines, economies where hundreds of millions of people are entering the energy-consuming middle class simultaneously, where the energy transition is an ambition for the next decade, not a reality of this one. These countries have the thinnest reserves, the weakest institutional buffers, and the greatest food-energy linkages. They are the last to transition, and the first to break. The global exposure to Hormuz is not diminishing with the energy transition. It is migrating toward the economies least equipped to absorb a shock. And the shock is here. In Rotterdam, Pieter is still working nights. He has been working nights since the crisis began. The emergency procedures manual is no longer in his locker. It is on his desk. He told his wife last week that he doesn't know when the normal shifts come back. She asked him how long the reserves last. He said, "We're finding out." It is once again the middle of the night. The supertanker moves through the passage at reduced speed, under escort from a U.S. destroyer, running parallel a kilometer to starboard. The cargo beneath it, crude oil bound for a refinery that has been rationing inputs for 12 days, is one of the handful of consignments that have made it through since the strait effectively closed. The officer on the bridge watches the radar with a different kind of attention than he is used to. Every blip matters now. Every unlit contact. Every contact that doesn't answer on channel 16. He knows what is at stake. He has always known. In theory. Now it is not theory. The world built itself on the assumption that this water would always be open. That the calculation, the cold, mutual, continuous calculation that closing the strait costs everyone more than it gains anyone, would always hold. That assumption held for 50 years. It has now been tested, and it failed. The question that remains, the one that has no answer yet, is not whether the strait can be reopened. Military planners believe it can, eventually. Minesweeping operations take weeks. Diplomatic channels through China and Turkey and Oman remain open. The physical corridor has not been permanently destroyed. The question is what kind of world reopens it. Whether the institutions, the supply chains, the energy architecture that depended on the strait's permanent openness can be reconstructed after they have been shown to be breakable. Whether the assumption that underpins the modern global economy, that geography can be relied upon, that lanes will always be open, that the calculation will always hold, survives its first serious failure. The strait is 30 kilometers wide. Somewhere, right now, a tanker is moving through it in the dark. The consequences of closing it are not. What is unfolding right now in the Strait of Hormuz goes far beyond diplomacy. It is a potential earthquake for your financial stability. If this deep dive helped you see through the noise, support the channel by leaving a like and subscribing so you never miss our upcoming alerts in this changing world order. To learn exactly how to protect your financial sovereignty against these shocks, click on the video right here on the left of your screen. It's your masterclass for navigating through uncertainty. I'll meet you over there.